Okay, before we begin, I'm sorry to have to do this, but quick plug. I'm now on Patreon, and you can get rewards like voting on what tutorial I do next, and early access to files and shit, and even Steam keys for stuff I've made. So, yeah. If that's your jam, go do it. Alright, hello, and welcome back to my 2.5D RPG in Unity tutorial. Today, we're going to be looking at a little tool that I've made to sort of speed up the process of adding sort of like conversations to NPCs in the game. Because, well, with an RPG, the text is going to be quite a large part, or conversations are going to be quite a large part of the game. So, any speeding up of that process will save a fair bit of time. So, this is what I've come up with. It's basically a tool that it gets all the NPCs in the world, tells you whether they have a conversation or not. So in this case, we can add a conversation to the NPC, and then it knows we have a conversation. It has a conversation on it, so it allows us to edit it as well. And then we can add, say, a starting line. So hello, who are you? And we'll just call this guy Jeff. We can set the conversation to whether it should be repeatable or not. And then we can add new lines to the conversation. So let's just add a couple here. You can see that we add new lines and it just sort of keeps them into a scrolly box here. So let's just select this line and say, if the player wants to respond, I am the protagonist. And okay then. And yeah. And then we can just, let's do another line. So I'll say, I'm nobody. Okay, then again, and NPC leaves unfinished. So we can also add actions to be triggered on this on these particular lines of code. So in this case, I've only got two because I only have two programmed for attacking unfinished and leaving unfinished. And we can also remove existing lines. So we've got these default lines here. We can just remove them. Remove that, and remove that. So yeah, so basically. And now let's go try and, oh, sorry, I'll just show you in the specs first. You can see that what this has done is it's basically done the work for us in a sort of slightly nicer interface, or quicker interface, I guess. So you can see that it says, hello, who are you? We're talking to Jeff. And we've got two lines for the two potential responses. So I am the protagonist and I am nobody. Okay, so let's just go quickly to this. So press E. It says, Jeff, hello, who are you? Say, I am nobody. And this will be the end of the conversation. So what this will do is, you should fuck off. No, you're not going to fuck off, Jeff? Okay. I think I selected it for the wrong one anyway, but whatever. No. Okay. So let's go look at how this worked. Okay, so first off, just a few minor changes to the conversation system to iron out some bugs. First off, on exit conversation, I've had a check just to see if active conversation equals this, because I found that if we were trying to go between two different conversations and one was calling exit conversation by mistake, then it would stop you using the new conversation, and that was bad. So that check just prevents that. Next up, on the conversation triggers, so for both leave and turn hostile, since I've added, since this tool we're making will add the thing of what's the word? Add the scripts to the actual NPC game object rather than as a child. I basically just said change the on trigger method to check if the parent is null. So if it's on the actual NPC game object, it will add the action to the NPC's game object. Otherwise, it will add it to the parent game object. And that's the same for the trigger for turning hostile here. Yeah, just to make sure. So you can do it either way if you want. If you want to have it as a child for neatness, then it's not too hard to implement. You just add a child game object and check for that instead of just checking for on the what's the word? On the parent game object or the NPC. And finally, for conversation line, I've sort of basically made the checking for if a line is the end of a conversation to be automatic. So basically we check if there are no more choices, so it's either null or the count is 0, then we just set end of conversation to true. in awake, and then that'll allow you to exit the conversation and then re-enter it at the start again. And that's easy peasy. So let's go on to the conversation creator. Okay, so this is going to be the actual meat of the conversation creator bit. So it'll be a quick crash course in creating editor windows for, yeah. Okay, so first off, we need using Unity Editor as an input. So just do that straight at the top. Next, the class needs to inherit from editor window. So it can use all the actual, so it can actually be drawn in the Unity GUI, basically. Next up, we have a static editor window called My Window. This is the window that it is drawn in. So if I just go to here, you'll see that this is an editor window, and it's not liking something. Oh well. The inspectors, an editor window, hierarchy, game view, whatever. They're all editor windows. Next up, we've got a static array of NPCs called potential conversation sources. These are the well, basically NPC game objects that we could talk to in the scene if we wanted to add a conversation to them. We've got a static NPC for the currently selected one, so that's the one we're editing. We've got a static conversation manager, again, the current conversation that we're editing, and a static conversation line for the current line we're editing. Next up, we have a load of vector2s. These are basically just for defining the scrolling areas in the window. So if I just edit that and we just add new choices, we'll see that this basically all those vector2s define these different scroll areas. So there are 4 of them. So I think there's one for this bit, one for these lines, one for these lines, and one for NPC actions after, but it can't be used yet because I only have 2, which is not enough to trigger it. So yeah. Next up, we have a static list of choices selected. This is basically a way of keeping track of where you are in the conversation. So it allows us to go back to the previous conversation line, and if we wanted to destroy one, we'd we'd know where to remove it from, in the new choices. So yeah, so that's what I'll explain that better in a minute. Okay, so next up, we have this little bit here called menu item. We just pass in a little path. So in this case, we're doing window, Unit02 games, and conversation creator. And if we go back to the Unity editor, we can go window, Unit02 games, conversation creator, and it brings up the conversation creator. Easy as can be. What that basically does by clicking on conversation creator is call this on enable. Which basically just creates the window and all that shit. So first off, it adds the on-scene GUI delegates, or it adds our implementation of on-scene GUI to on-scene GUI delegate. So basically, for all the on-scene GUI stuff that could exist, we can also call ours, but we don't actually use it in here, I don't think. But yeah, no, we don't. Oh, okay, my mistake. We don't need that anymore, so I'll just get rid of that. So please ignore me. Okay, so first off, we assign my window to be editor window.getWindow, type of conversation creator. What that does is basically just creates the window. We can also assign things like a minimum size, so new vector2, just 300 by 600 pixels, basically just to, what's the word? The words will come in a minute. It basically just stops it being below that size, so it's easy to use and stuff. Then we just set choice selected to be a new list of conversation lines, and we call this find NPCs and scene, which is literally just potential conversation sources equals find object of type NPC, and easy as can be. Okay, so next up, we don't have anything on disable, so I could probably get rid of that actually now that we've not got the on-scene GUI delegate. If you were confused about what it is, basically on-scene GUI would allow you to draw stuff in this scene view. So say if you wanted to highlight the current NPC that you were drawing on, you'd be able to do that in the on-scene GUI, but since we're not doing anything like that, we don't need it. If you'd like something like that explained, then I can do that. This shouldn't be too long. So yeah. Next is the on recompile. This is basically just a way for when you've like made a change, it'll recompile, and sometimes that'll like throw an error and stop it getting drawn correctly. So what this does is, in our on GUI method, which is where all our like code goes, basically, all the inspector code, what we do is we try to create a scroll view, which basically just is a start. And if we can't do that for whatever reason, like the window isn't correct or something, then we just call on recompile, and that will basically just reset the actual editor window, and everything basically works after that. Okay. So next up, GUI layout.label. Literally just writes some text in the editor window. So you'll see that conversation creator and selects an NPC to add the conversation to. Yeah. See, they're just labels. That's what a label does. Next up, scroll position. So you'll remember these as one of the vector 2s we had. So it's just an X and a Y coordinate. And what this does is allows us to scroll through an area. And likewise, if you are, so we just pass in the scroll position as an argument. We set the width to be the windows, to be mywindow.position.width. I'm not sure why width is kept under position, but it is, I guess, because it's a rect. But yeah, that's how it's done. And we can set a height for it. So in this case, I've set a height of 100 pixels. So that's fine. And remember, if we are starting a scroll view, we also have to have a linked end scroll view. Just to like say, all right, we've done all this content in between this editor GUI layout.begin scroll view and GUI layout or editor GUI layout.end scroll view. That is basically the content. This is basically the contents of the little scrolling area. Right. So for what's in the scrolling area, we go through each of the NPCs in potential conversation sources. So that's just all the NPCs in the scene. We call GUI layout.begin horizontal, which also, like the scroll view, has an end horizontal with it. And what this does is it basically allows us to easily place sort of objects horizontally. So in this case, we've got a label with the NPC's name and whether it has a conversation or not, and a button to edit or add a conversation to that NPC. So that's what we do here. So if n.gameObject.getComponent conversation manager equals true, so it already has a conversation, we create a label saying that the game object has a conversation, and we create a GUI layout.button for editing the conversation. So the currently selected NPC is the one in the loop. The current conversation is get the conversation manager. And if the current conversation's choices is more than 0, so there is an already existing choice, sorry, we will just set the current line to be equal to the first choice in that conversation. And we add choices selected, or we add the line we just found in the current conversation choices to the choices selected. Right, so if we don't have a conversation already on the game object, then we just write a name in the label and have a button add conversation to NPC. And we set the current, again, we select the currently selected NPC. We set the current conversation to be n.gameObject.add component instead of get component. So that just adds a conversation manager. And then we set the current conversation choices to be equal to a new list, just to initialize it. Current conversation.talking to is equal to just this.gameObject.name as a default. You can change it in the inspector or in this tool if you so wish. And finally, the current conversation.starting line is equal to the I just set it to default starting line, so you know to change it. Okay. Okay, so the next section we have is just a line to separate it, just a label. And then we say if the currently selected NPC is null, so if you've not selected anything from this select section here, we just say, please select. I'm out of breath from running down the fucking stairs, Jesus. Sorry, okay. Next up, and so if the currently selected NPC is not null, then we draw labels basically to say that this is the current conversation start, and it'll say who you're talking to and what the starting line is. And then we begin a horizontal, so we have a GY label starting line, and then we have a string called starting line, and what we'd use is a GUI layout.text field, which is basically just like text input here, so you can input text. And we pass in the current conversation.starting line as an argument, so basically what is displayed in this text field is the starting line. But at the same time, if we change it, the next line sets the current conversation.starting line to be equal to whatever's in starting line. So we can edit it here and it will automatically update it. So that's good. And then we can end horizontal. And likewise, we have an identical thing for setting the name of who we are talking to. So string talking to is equal to GUI layout.text field, and yeah. We also have a button to set whether the conversation is repeatable or not. So if current conversation.repeatable is true, then we have a button that says conversation is repeatable, but if we press that button, it will set it to false, and vice versa here. Okay, so next up, we are created using this scroll position 2. Again, to just give us another like scrolling area, because we don't know how many potential conversation choices that we'll have in this conversation. So by doing this, we just like make sure it's all neat and doesn't take up too much space, but we can still access them all. But if the current conversation choices is null, or we don't have any, we don't do anything. Otherwise, for each of the conversation lines in current conversation choices, we just check if it's null. I don't think we need that anymore because it was just due to an error on my part, which I've gotten rid of before, but might as well keep it in anyway. So if the conversation is null by any means, it'll just skip it. Otherwise, we begin a horizontal again with the GUI layout. We write a label with the reply, and if we click GUI button that just says select line, it will set that whatever conversation line is there to be the current line and allow us to edit it. So it says current line equals CL, choices selected dot clear, and choices selected dot add current line. So basically it just gets rid of anything in the choices selected and then says us to be on the current line. And then we end the scroll view. And after this, we have a button which basically just adds new lines to the conversation. So this is just before wherever the conversation starts. So basically we just add the current we add a new conversation line to the currently selected NPC here, and we store it under CL. We just initialize it, so cl.playerline is equal to the default player line. The cl.reply is equal to default response. We set it to we set it to be repeatable. And if the current conversation choices is null, then we reinitialize it just to make sure that we can actually add the new line to the current conversation choices and not sort of get an error or whatever, or it not be added. And then finally we just add it to the choices, and that will basically just allow us to add a conversation choice to, where is it, conversation manager here. So yeah. Okay, so now we're on to the current line section. So basically, we've edited the start of the conversation, or we've done the start of the conversation. Now will be the all the lines which are potential answers or choices in the conversation. So it's identical pretty much to the start. So as you'll see here, if current line is null, we don't do anything. Otherwise, we just say what the current line is, and we create a scroll position, and we go through all the, and if we actually have choices in this line, we go through each of them, and we just add a select line option, and that will allow us to move on to any choices that are within this conversation line. And yeah, then we end the horizontal and end the scroll view after we've done all that. So this allows us to get further into the conversation tree sort of thing. Next up, we have begin horizontal. This basically just is, again, like the starting line before. It just allows us to use a GUI layout.text field to edit what the player's response is to the NPC, and stores that in the current line.player line. And likewise, again, we have an identical thing, except we're doing the NPC's response this time. So yeah, just GUI layout.text field and current line.reply. Simple, easy to remember. And again, identical bit of code. If current line is repeatable, then we have a GUI layout.button. Line is repeatable, that makes it false, and vice versa. So we can switch it between the line being repeatable, say if it was just an opening merchant's inventory kind of thing, or line is not repeatable, where you might be collecting a quest reward or something. Next up, we have our final scroll position for something new. This is just actually no. Ooh, that was wrong. My mistake. So yeah, this basically is a check for whether we have an action to perform on when this line is selected. So if we have one, it does. Or if we don't, we don't. And I think I might have got them back to front, but whatever. Next up, we call begin horizontal, and we add a label for NPC attacks on finish. And if we click this add button here, then first off, we check if there is an onSelect already on the object, and if there is, we destroy it. And then we add a new conversation code trigger of the turn hostile, and we set the current line.onSelect to be the one we just added. And likewise, we have an identical one for NPC leaves on finish. Okay. And we end the scroll view here. Okay, and then we also have a button to add a new choice to the current line. So again, it would be identical to the one for the conversation parent or the conversation manager. So creates a new conversation line by adding it to the game object, sets the lines to be default, sets repeatable to be true, initializes the list of new choices in both this currently selected line and the new line we've created, and just adds the new line we've created to the current line's choices. We also have a new button here called that removes the current line from the parent. So basically what this does is if we have if there are more than one choices selected in the thing. So basically if you've made more than one choice, so that'd be, say, you would like three, I don't know how to explain it. Yeah. So if you'd like, so you know, never mind, basically. If you've got more than one choice selected, it means you've selected two options and not exited out. So what this does is it basically gets the choices selected .index of -1, so it'll get the previous choice and will remove the current line from that to destroy it. So that's how it gets the parent, if that makes sense. But if the choice selected.count is less than or equal to 1, we know that the current line is part of the actual initial starting choices of the conversation. So we just remove it from the current conversation choices, which are the these are basically just the starting choices. And we destroy it. Well, we use destroy immediate rather than destroy because you have to if you're creating an editor extension. And finally, for the last line, if choices selected is equal to null or choices selected.count is less than 2, we don't do anything, but otherwise we just draw this basically just debugs the this basically just draws all the conversation selected bits. So it'll draw each of the current conversation, the starting line, or it'll go from, okay, start again. What this does is if there have been choices selected, it'll store each of the starting lines of those choices as a string, and then add these little 2 arrows to separate them. And basically what it does is allows us to it just gives you a visual of what choices you've selected in the inspector, and then just draws them as a label. And likewise, under this we have a button called Go to Previous Line. Again, what this does is we remove the current line from the choices selected, and if there are still lines to be had in the if there's still anything in the choices selected.count after we've removed the current line, then we go to that. So that would be like going 1 up in the conversation tree, I guess. And then current line is equal to null if there aren't any more. And that's pretty much it for the conversation creator. I'll just go over that again. So we've got this. It's probably going to bitch at me. We'll edit that. I'll select that line, and you can see for the go to previous line bit, we can see hello, who are you? It goes to OK then it goes to default response. But if we and then we can set like byte here, you can see it all changing and shit. So yeah. So that was my conversation creator in Unity. Sorry for getting a bit scatterbrained at the end there. I'm quite tired, but whatever. So yeah, like I said before, I'm on Patreon, and you can get access to these files, the project files as they are now, if you pledge like $5, I think it is, and you can also pledge like $1, and you'll get the files when the whole project is done. And what else? And if you really fancy treating yourself, you can pledge $10, and you'll get like a Steam key for Loud or Quiet. And then like any projects I publish independently, you'll get something from there, and you'll get a chance to like ask me questions on like a monthly basis. You know, I'll do like a Q&A for like all programming and gaming shit. And if that's your kind of thing, go donate to me on Patreon. If not, go buy Loud or Quiet on Steam. It's on sale on the weekly deal for like 25% off. And check out all my other shit on Itch.io. I've got the previous tutorial series files and all that. You know, it's good stuff. Go check it out. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.